leading property economist has warned millions of Australian renters could soon face big rent rises as the real estate market changes after the government's big reforms to housing taxes.
Now, the caution comes as the once crowded Saturday home auctions struggle to draw buyers.
The government says rent will go up by $2 a week. It's an interesting figure to put on it, and CommBank estimates agree, but some experts think it'll be closer to $50 a week.
Our tightest rental market on record is about to get much worse.
It is scary, really scary. It's terrifying.
Around half the state's landlords are looking to sell their investment properties.
The 38-year-old Hobart renter has moved 13 times in her adult life, jumping from share house to share house. But today, she's saying goodbye to it all. As a retail worker, Maddie can't afford to rent a place on her own or to buy.
Your rent is going up by $100 a week, and the government told you it would be $2. That is $5,200 a year, out of a household already handing over a third of its pay before tax, just to keep a roof over its head. And the home you are sitting in tonight may not be a rental in a year. 22,640 of them stopped being rentals in a single 3-month stretch. Here is the part nobody has explained to you: why the official figure is wrong by a factor of 50.
$30 a week since the budget. Kez in Geelong says, I've been told my rent will rise by $64 a week. That will be hard on my already tight budget. Nicole from Logan, an extra $80 weekly. Maggie from Sydney says her rent is set to increase by $100 a week. And this comes despite predictions from Treasury that we're being told
$64, $80, $100. Those are not forecasts from a modelling firm. They are people writing into a breakfast program with the letter already on the kitchen table. The figure the Treasury attached to this policy, and the figure the Commonwealth Bank agreed with, was $2 a week. $2 is a bus fare. $2 is the rounding error on a grocery shop. Every renter who has opened a lease renewal since May knows the number on the page is not $2, and the gap between what was promised and what is arriving is the whole story of this video. Here is where it gets worse, and it gets worse quickly. The people who actually price rental property for a living were asked the same question, and their answer was not $2.
So I actually think it reduces the amount of investors in the market, which ultimately means that you get higher rental prices at the margin, I think. And then you've got to layer on top of that, this is coming at a time where we've only got 1.7% of the housing stock is available for rent. So it's a very tight rental market. Not to mention you've got interest rate increases.
On the 12th of May, at 7:30 in the evening, the rules that had governed Australian rental property for 4 decades were rewritten. From the 1st of July next year, an investor who buys an established house can no longer take the loss on that house off their wage income. The 50% capital gains discount goes too, replaced with indexation and a minimum tax of 30%. This is not a proposal sitting in a committee somewhere. It is law, and the Tax Office has already published the page that says so. Listen to how an economist explains what those 2 levers were actually doing, because the mechanism matters more than the politics.
The current system provides very strong incentives for people to invest in residential property, either by allowing them to deduct losses on rental property from their personal income, which is negative gearing.
Strip that incentive out, and you have not removed a loophole in the abstract. You have removed the reason roughly 2.2 million ordinary Australians, most of them holding exactly one property, were willing to carry a loss on a house every year and let somebody else live in it. The government's own case is that 75,000 people will get into home ownership over a decade because of this. What it does not say out loud is where the people currently living in those houses go while that happens. And the movement had already started before the ink was dry. Here is the part that should make your blood run cold, because it is not a forecast, it is a count. 3/4 sold to owner-occupiers is the sentence that decides your rent.
25% of landlords in Melbourne sold one or more properties in the past 12 months. In Brisbane, it was 23%. The national average is 12%, which is unprecedented. What's more, 3/4 of the sales were to owner-occupiers, not other landlords.
A house sold from one landlord to another stays a rental. A house sold to a family who move into it stops being a rental permanently. In the 3 months to the end of autumn, landlords listed 22,640 former rentals for sale. 4,865 of them in Sydney, 5,565 in Melbourne. In those two cities, 1 in every 5 homes on the market was a house somebody was renting. Listen to a Victorian landlord explain why he sold 3 of his houses.
I think what we've seen in Melbourne and Victoria as a whole is investors are exiting the market.
Although they can get a bad rap, landlords are an important part of the housing ecosystem, which is why there was alarm when a recent survey of 1,700 investors found 1 in 3 had sold a Victorian property in the past year.
And here is where you might switch off, because you own your home, and this sounds like somebody else's problem. So let me point it at you directly. Every one of those houses that leaves the rental pool pushes the family who was in it into the queue your daughter is standing in, or your father is standing in, or the queue you will be standing in the week you sell to move closer to a hospital. This is not a market you visit by choice. It is the market you land in the moment anything in your life changes. Dawn is the shape of this story that the coverage keeps missing. The picture in your head of an Australian renter is a 26-year-old in a share house, and half of all renter households are still headed by somebody between 25 and 44. But the Reserve Bank's own work says the share of renting households aged 45 and over has been climbing for years, and single older women are the fastest growing group in public housing. Hear an older Australian on the pension describe what that actually costs.
We didn't ask to get old and go on the age pension. I'd like to go out once a week, go to a cafe and have a coffee and toasted sandwich or something. But you go and get a loaf of bread and come home and make your own toasted sandwiches and your cup of coffee because it's cheaper.
Home ownership among Australians aged 55 to 64 fell from 86% to 81% in 15 years. And the share of that age group who owned outright collapsed from about 80% to 56%. Australia now carries the highest rate of rental poverty among older people anywhere in the developed world. That is not a young person's statistic. Here is the bit that really stings. For a renter, a rent rise is not a line item you absorb. It is the difference between a home and a car.
I know I am one rental increase from being homeless, that I can't think about it too much. I just have to pay it. I just have to work out how to pay it and then work out how to pay everything else.
That is the honest arithmetic of the Australian rental market, and it is worth sitting with, because it explains why a $2 forecast and a $100 letter are not the same argument at different volumes. They are different lives. Nationally, rents have surged almost 3 times faster than wages over 5 years, and the typical tenant is now handing over 33% of their income before tax. In the capital cities, the combined median asking rent sits near $795 a week, which is 41% of what a median household actually has to spend. On a public forum, one Sydney tenant posted the notice they had just been handed, a 40% increase on a flat they had lived in since 2020. Another wrote that theirs went from $690 a week to $850, a 23% jump in one letter. And when a landlord decides the maths no longer works, the tenant is not consulted. They are managed out.
Another rental property gone.
We're sold! Congratulations to
Snapped up by first home buyers, this house was rented long term, but its current owner had to sell.
The costs and the expenses were just too significant.
Paying a tenant to leave is the polite version. The blunt version arrives as a 90-day notice with no reason attached to it, timed so the property is empty for the open home. One tenant in Western Sydney posted that their agent was pressuring them to break a fixed-term lease early so the owner could sell, and asked publicly where they stood. Another described the sequence exactly as it usually runs. A 20% rise first, and when they counter-offered, a 90-day no-grounds notice by return post. That is the machinery of a market with nothing spare in it, and it was running hard before a single line of the tax change took effect. Listen to what the head of the New South Wales Tenants Union says happens to rents when the market pauses for breath.
The data reveals rents surged almost 3 times faster than wages over the 5 years to last September. That means people are spending an average of 33% of their pre-tax income on rent. Now, the CEO of the New South Wales Tenants Union, Leo Patterson-Ross.
Against 33% of pre-tax income, the Commonwealth's answer is rent assistance. For a single-age pensioner, the maximum is $215.40 a fortnight, about $5,600 a year, and it covers roughly 23% of an average capital city rent. Over the last measured year, that payment rose 2%, while rents rose 4.5%. The result is a group of Australians the system was never designed to hold. More than 325,000 age pensioners were receiving rent assistance last June, and 105,000 of them were still in rental stress after it was paid, spending more than a third of everything they had on rent. Here is what a 10% rent rise looks like when you are 73 and living on the pension.
The 73-year-old who lives on the coast, south of Perth, was already struggling to make ends meet living on the pension before her rent went up more than 10% to $640 a fortnight.
My rent went up to $70 a fortnight and I've now only got about $80.
$80 a fortnight for food and $60 a month for diabetes medication out of what is left. She does not blame her landlord, and she is right not to. Her landlord is carrying the same rates, the same insurance, and the same interest as everybody else. The decision that set the price of her fortnight was made in Canberra, and the number attached to it in the budget papers was $2 a week. And if you own your home outright tonight, and you have listened to all of this as somebody else's misfortune, here is the part that should change how you hear it. Anglicare checked 49,000 listings across the country in March. For a single person on the age pension, 0.2% were affordable. For a couple, 0.7%, and most of those were rooms in share houses. That is the housing market waiting for you on the day you sell the family home to fund care, or the day a marriage ends, or the day the money runs out. Your house is the only thing standing between you and that number. The industry that builds and sells those houses ran its own numbers, and they did not match the government's either.
Now, the modelling shows that over the next 4 years, the federal budget will cause new housing supply to fall by almost 9,000 homes, rents to increase by up to $9 per week, and construction jobs to fall by more than 3,800.
So now there are 4 numbers on the table for the same envelope on your kitchen bench. The Treasury and the Commonwealth Bank say $2 a week. The property industry's own modelling says up to $9. A fund manager pricing the market says closer to $50. And a Melbourne buyer's agent, watching long-term landlords sell and the stock go to owner-occupiers, says 20% over 2 to 3 years. A thread on the biggest Australian finance forum put it more plainly than any of the modelling did. arguing the change is being wildly underestimated because everybody is watching investors and nobody is watching supply. And while the modelling argues, the letters keep landing. Listen to a hospital worker describe what moving actually costs him.
He already pays $700 a week in rent, and competition for properties is fierce.
We've started to look, but everything is so cost prohibitive. So we're looking at an increase of $500 a week.
We're going to see less places to rent, and we're going to see costs go up.
That is the trap, and it is worth naming precisely. In a normal market, a rent rise is a negotiation because the tenant can leave. In this market, the tenant cannot leave because the vacancy rate has spent 3 years under half of its long-run average. Cotality measured the national vacancy rate at 1.47%, a record low against a pre-pandemic decade average of 3.3%. One household posted that the moment money came into their family, the owner decided to sell, and they were put out of the house they had been renting. Into that, the two analytics firms that track listings in real time found the number of homes available to rent fell in every single capital city in May, and on the Gold and Sunshine coasts as owners moved to sell ahead of the change. Hear how the national property editor at Domain describes the market that produces.
And by that I mean we've got record high rents, record low vacancy rates all around the country, but we are beginning to see certain price points in certain cities plateauing. So we're not seeing those sort of breakneck rental increases that we have seen over the past few years, but certainly tenants are at the absolute coalface of this.
That plateau lasted exactly as long as the uncertainty did. Domain's June quarter report found combined capital city house rents rose $20 in 3 months, the strongest quarterly increase in almost 2 years. In Sydney, house rents jumped 6.3%, $50 a week, to a record $850. Sydney unit rents rose $30 to a record $780. $50 a week in 1 quarter, in one city, against a national forecast of 2. And that is before a single provision of the law has actually commenced, because it does not start until the 1st of July next year. What you are watching now is the anticipation, not the event. The best case is the one the Commonwealth Bank has published, and it is not fantasy. Because every existing investor is grandfathered, selling means surrendering a tax benefit they can never get back. So most of them hold. On that path, the exodus never arrives. Prices come in about 3% below where they would have been, and the new build exemption starts adding supply from the back end of the decade. Rents rise, but slowly. The realistic case is the one already showing up in the data. 22,640 ex-rentals listed in a quarter, 3/4 of them going to owner-occupiers and never coming back. Vacancy under 1.5%, and Sydney house rents putting on $50 in 90 days. On that path, rents rise around 10% over 2 years, which, on a $750 tenancy, is another $75 a week, or $4,000 a year. The worst case is the one the Melbourne agents are pricing. 20% over 2 to 3 years, vacancy back under 1%, and the households at the bottom of it competing for a share of listings that Anglicare already measures in tenths of 1%. In that scenario, the marginal renter is not paying more. They are leaving, and where they go is a friend's spare room, an adult child's house, a caravan park, or a car. So here is the reason the official figure is wrong by a factor of 50. And it is not complicated once you see it. The government modelled a tax change. It did not model a transfer. Because the rules were grandfathered, no existing investor is forced out, which is exactly what makes the $2 figure defensible on paper. But every house that does leave the rental pool leaves it permanently, sold to a family who will live in it. And the 75,000 Australians the policy helps into ownership are, in most cases, the same houses being taken away from the people currently renting them. That trade might still be the right one. Reasonable people argue it is. But it was sold to you as a policy with no losers. And it has losers, and they are the least able to carry it. A single pensioner with $80 a fortnight for food after the rent is not an unintended consequence of this policy. She is the mechanism working exactly as designed. And nobody in Canberra put her number in the budget papers. If you are renting, the leverage you have is time and paper, and both run out quietly. First, read what your lease actually allows before you read the number. In most states, an increase during a fixed term is only valid if the agreement permits it, and the notice period is set by law, not by your agent. Photograph the clause today. Second, get the comparable rents before you reply, not after. Every state tribunal weighs what similar properties in your suburb actually let for. Pull 10 current listings within 2 kilometres and save the screenshots with the date visible. Third, treat a counteroffer as a business letter, not a plea. State the figure you will pay, your payment record, and what a vacancy costs the owner in weeks. Owners respond to arithmetic. Send it in writing, never by phone. Fourth, if you are over 55 and renting, join the Social and Affordable Housing Register in your state now, before you need it. The waiting lists run to years, and the application is not backdated. Do it this week. Fifth, if you own your home and someone in your family rents, say out loud that the spare room exists. Certainty is worth more than money here. Knowing there is somewhere to go is what stops a rent rise becoming a car park. Now tell me this, what has your rent gone up by since May, in dollars a week? And what did your agent say was the reason? Put the number in the comments, because the government put $2 in the budget papers and the rest of us can count.